Good afternoon, everyone. This is a webinar on-farm market, food safety, and recall readiness. This webinar is supported by the Northeast Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education Program, known as SARE. SARE is a program of the National Institute of Food and Agriculture and the U.S. Department of Agriculture. I work for the Agricultural Law Education Initiative and for the Francis King Carey School of Law at the University of Maryland, Baltimore. Myself and my colleagues at College Park and at the University of Maryland Eastern Shore School of Agriculture and Natural Sciences make up the Agricultural Law Education Initiative. There is our website and our social media information and our email if you'd like to email us. Our job is to educate farmers throughout the state and help them with any legal needs that they may have. Part of the funding for our program comes from the University of Maryland Empower. Empowering the state brings together the two universities of distinction to form a new collaborative partnership, and those universities are the University of Maryland College Park and the University of Maryland Baltimore. Just a quick disclaimer, this webinar is intended to provide general information and should not be construed as providing legal advice. For advice about how these issues might apply to your operation, please consult your individual attorney. Our website, if you've never visited our website before, I encourage you to check it out. It is umaglaw.org. We have easy-to-read legal publications. You can sign up for our quarterly update. We also have videos. Following today's webinar, we will be putting a recording of this under the video section of our website. So if you know anybody who wanted to join today and couldn't, or if you want to listen to this again at any point, you can find it on that videos link there. Throughout the webinar today, I will be referencing materials that may be found, that are found on umaglaw.org, and that's under the food safety pages and the publication library pages. So it may benefit you to have those pages open on your computer as you follow along today, but I will be providing links. Okay, so food safety risks on an on-farm market operation. And when I talk about on-farm market, I'm being pretty inclusive with that term. I'm including roadside stands, if you have any kind of market or store on your farm where you're selling agricultural, horticultural products directly to consumers. So there's a couple different steps that on-farm market operators can take in order to identify and prevent risks on their operation. The first is to conduct a comprehensive assessment of the potential risks on their farm, and we're going to give you a lot of tips today to try to help you through that process. Identify the risks and then take steps to minimize them in a food safety plan. Educate and training employees on food safety procedures. And anytime we educate and train employees, it's a really good idea to maintain a record of those employee trainings. Communicating risks and expectations to your customers. This webinar is sort of part 2 of a project. We administered this on a farm last month and used some on-farm examples and got some feedback from on-farm market operators. And this was the area that folks seemed to have the biggest need. This was a challenge in order to communicate food safety risks to customers. I know nobody wants to turn off their customers, but it's important to communicate with them some issues, and I'll be explaining that in more detail as we go. And then finally establishing emergency response procedures, and that's really going to be part 2 of the webinar today, talking about recall readiness. And as we go today, if anyone has any questions or comments, feel free to type them in the chat box. This webinar is customized for on-farm market operators, and we're doing that so that folks can receive as specific information as possible with the hopes that it will be more applicable than a general training. And also, I hope that comments or questions that folks have will be of interest to other people listening. Okay, so how do you go about conducting the assessment of your farm and preventing those food safety risks? Well, we've created an easy-to-use checklist that includes the risks and the recommendations explained in today's webinar. Here's a link to the checklist. It can be found on the food safety page of umaglaw.org. So after today's webinar, I encourage you to download that and print it out. Maryland Department of Agriculture's Department of Food Quality Assurance has DVDs that may be used in worker trainings. The department also has signs that you can post on your operation to educate your customers. For those materials, you can contact Deanna Baldwin, and there's her phone number and her email. Establishing emergency response procedures, we're going to be discussing that today. And so by attending today's webinar, you're already on your way to establishing those procedures. So food safety risks of an on-farm market operation, they can come from a variety of sources. I've broken them down here into some categories, from harvest and handling, worker and farmer hygiene, buildings, displays, customer contamination, and then bathrooms at an on-farm market. All right, so harvest and handling. So to prevent product contamination during harvest and handling, the best thing that you can do is to follow good agricultural practices and pay attention to the Food Safety Modernization Act. If you haven't already taken a Maryland GAP training or a GAP training in your state, if you're not in Maryland, I would encourage you to do so. They're offered every winter here. Once you've taken the training, you then have to draft a food safety plan and be audited in order to be considered GAP certified. I have provided you a link here to a wonderful presentation that Justine Ballou from the University of Maryland put together and was part of the on-farm trainings that we did last month. It walks you through the different GAP and pre-harvest contamination steps. I will try to summarize it briefly here, although I don't have time to go through the whole thing. But basically, GAP focuses on these four topics: workers, water, wildlife, and waste. And sometimes these are referred to as the 4 Ws. So I'll give you a couple of Justine's slides here, but like I said, for the full presentation, check out that link. But in terms of workers, GAP emphasizes the importance of training your workers. Fresh fruits and vegetables, the things that are often sold at on-farm markets, often receive no additional processing. So contamination with a pathogen can result. And so this is an important thing to keep in mind in the on-farm market context. Workers need to use food safety practices every day to reduce produce safety risks, and food safety practices are learned, so training is extremely important. Workers, water. Water is another one of the 4 Ws. So water quality requirements are an important component of those GAP practices. So it really depends on what you're using the water for in terms of what are the water quality requirements. I've given you here the irrigation water requirements. And then for post-harvest water, so if you're washing the produce that's being sold at your on-farm market, you really should have 0 CFU of total coliforms in a sample. So that's water that's coming in contact with produce during and after harvest, water that your workers are washing their hands with. And in the on-farm market context, it's important to think about ice as well. So if you are putting produce on ice, are you testing that water that's going in and coming out of your ice machine? And another one of the W's, wildlife. So if you're going to be compliant with GAP, you need to be monitoring for wildlife activity on your operation during the growing season, monitoring for feces and evidence of intrusion, evaluating the risk of fecal contamination on produce, consider past observations, and then immediately prior to harvest, are you doing a sweep or are you having your workers do a sweep to monitor for fecal contamination so that you can assess whether or not a crop should be harvested? Clearly, if a crop is visibly contaminated with animal fecal matter, it should not be harvested because that is going to present a risk. And then the last W of GAP is about waste. And that's where we're talking about animal manure. A lot of farmers have great success using animal manure as part of their operations. It's a great source of nutrients, great way to recycle waste, great for soil health, but it can present risks. So if you do use animal waste in your operation, important to take a look at that full presentation and get some more details on that. Okay, so in Maryland, some more information pertaining to GAP is the GAP audit questionnaire, a model food safety plan, and charts to help you keep records and be GAP compliant. So I've given you the link here, and this is sometimes I think it's a little hard to find, so I thought it was important to provide this link. Go through that gap audit questionnaire. That's also a wonderful tool to use to do that farm self-assessment, because that is the exact audit questionnaire that the Department of Agriculture will use as they walk around your farm and decide whether or not you are eligible to be GAP certified. So go ahead and use that as another way to self-assess your operation. Okay, what about FSMA, the Food Safety Modernization Act? Well, if I tried to explain everything about the Food Safety Modernization Act today, we'd be here until next week, so I can't do that. But the good news is that FSMA is very similar to Maryland Good Agricultural Practices, so if you are already complying with those, you're well on your way. Most folks ask us, does FSMA apply to my operation? And if so, what do I need to do? For the answer to both of these questions, check out this presentation. This is a presentation that Deanna Baldwin, the Director of the Food Quality Assurance part of Maryland Department of Agriculture, put together, and it's a wonderful explanation of which farmers need to worry about FSMA and when they need to be in compliance and what they need to do to be in compliance. Here is a visual of that food safety checklist that I told you we put together for you. So that's the one you'll find on Ag Law. If you're interested in the GAP or FSMA trainings, I know they just had a FSMA training in Maryland on February 12th, but there is an advanced GAP training that's going to have an emphasis on water quality and testing. So if you've already gone through GAP, consider attending this advanced GAP training, and that's going to be in Annapolis. For more information on that training and future GAP and FSMA trainings, you can contact Justine, and I provided her information there. Okay, so aside from all that, worker and farmer hygiene risks and recommendations. Workers should be trained on how human pathogens are spread. Workers should be washing their hands before handling produce, after using the bathroom, after eating, emptying trash, handling untreated compost, using pesticides, cleaning chemicals, and/or handling animals. Workers should not be working when they're sick or when they have an open cut. And when possible, workers handling cash transactions should not be touching produce to prevent cross-contamination from currency. I understand, if the person ringing people up at the on-farm market, there is going to be some contact between that person and produce. But if you have enough folks on your operation, don't have the person who's handling cash all morning, then go in the back and start sorting produce before they've washed their hands. Trying to keep those two things separate is a good way to prevent cross-contamination. Farmers need to maintain proper hygiene to prevent being the source of food safety risks. So farmers should follow the same hygiene routine as workers to set a good example and reduce risks. Farmers should not bring four-legged friends to work. So it's a good idea to prevent folks from bringing pets onto the farm and into the on-farm market if possible, and farmers should follow the same procedure with their four-legged friends. And farmers should also maintain a first aid kit so that if a worker is injured, it can be properly addressed. Okay, so let's talk about building contamination risks and recommendations. Market buildings should be monitored for pests, and pests should be controlled. I recently read that some of the, they've done a few test inspections for the Food Safety Modernization Act, and one of the areas that a lot of farmers were coming up in need of improvement was monitoring for pests around farm buildings. So this is definitely something that I think inspectors are going to be looking for. So make sure you're keeping an eye out for pests and taking appropriate steps to control those pests. Food should be stored off of the floor of the market, 6 inches up on a pallet if possible, and when it's in a cooler, not in direct contact with the cooler walls. So again, these are all recommendations. I know, during your busy season, you're going to have, if you use a cooler to cool down your produce, it's going to be full. But to the extent possible, try to keep those food items off of a cooler wall or off of the wall of the market. That can hopefully help you reduce those risks. Condensation in coolers should be prevented from dripping directly on food. So if you have a big condenser in the corner of your cooler,
and it's possible, don't store food under that condenser. Some very nasty pathogens such as Listeria can live even in cold temperatures. They thrive in a situation like a cooler, and a condenser unit can be a source of that. Okay, lighting fixtures. Lighting fixtures should be covered to prevent contamination if a fixture breaks. Oh, Robert, we can see you on your video there. Lighting fixtures should be covered to prevent contamination because if a light bulb breaks and shards of glass go into all your produce, that's clearly going to present a risk. Display risks and recommendations. The produce should be stored separately and never under high-risk meat, poultry, or allergenic foods such as milk, eggs, and soy. Melting ice should be allowed to drain to prevent food from sitting in water. So I know a lot of folks use ice, especially at markets. I understand that. Again, this is just a recommendation. If you can find a way to drain that ice so that that food is not just sitting in melting ice water, that'd be a best practice. All right, so thinking about display risks and recommendations for an on-farm market. Reused containers, I know they're great for the carbon footprint, but they can contain bacteria and lead to the spread of pathogens. So think about cleaning and sanitizing all food contact surfaces and containers that are coming into contact with produce that you're going to be selling. So storage crates need to be cleaned if they're going to be reused and sanitized between uses, and broken crates should be disposed of. Label storage containers as harvest and post-harvest to avoid cross-contamination. So I know a lot of farmers tend to, use, they have a whole bunch of the same type of bin, and they use those, yellow harvest baskets or what have you for a lot of different purposes. If you're having containers out in the field, possibly directly on the dirt, and your workers are dealing with those, think about if there's a way you can easily label those things as harvest and post-harvest so that the containers that are out in the field sitting directly on the dirt aren't the same containers that are then going to be used in the market. Cardboard boxes, they should be treated as single use for fresh produce unless a liner is used. And bags given to customers should be new and free of chemicals that can contaminate food. Let's talk about product sampling. Product sampling is wonderful. I love going to an on-farm market and sampling products. However, it does need to be something that's done carefully. So let's think of some ways that we can reduce those risks. So produce that's put out for a product sample should always be washed with potable water before being cut up for samples. Handle samples with freshly washed hands or single-use gloves. Avoid the potential for multiple handlings by customers by inserting a toothpick into each piece or by serving samples in an individual serving cup. So again, I know this is can be a lot of plastic for some folks who are trying to cut down on that, but you got to think about if you put a plate out with a bunch of different pieces of cut up fruit, every hand that goes into that plate or that bowl is another potential way that pathogens could be spread and someone could get sick. So if you can, use toothpicks, put things in single serving cups. Using a utensil like a tong can also be helpful so that folks can select a sample or deli tissue so that they're not touching the product directly with their hands. Record and keep track of how long samples have been on a display table. So have a procedure for this for your market. Especially during the warmer months, if we're going to be cutting up and having samples out, they really shouldn't be out for example, more than 2 hours. So make a notation of when the sample was put out and when yourself or your workers should discard of it. To avoid presenting produce that doesn't look fresh, discard any cut samples that have been sitting out for more than 2 hours. So that's sort of our touchstone time frame. Have a wastebasket nearby so that folks can dispose of those sample litter, like toothpicks. You wouldn't want that getting back into your product. Okay, so we've hinted at this, but consumer contamination or customer contamination is a concern in a market. You have a lot of people coming in and out, hopefully, if you have a successful market. And so you need to think about and consider how you're going to manage those risks. Prevent contamination from customers to bulk items by providing utensils such as tongs, deli tissue, just as you would with the sampling. And then inform your customers of your food safety procedures. Do you have any signs in your market about the importance of washing hands after going to the bathroom and or touching animals? I know some folks have, like a diverse operation. Maybe you have some goats or things like that, a petting zoo or some animals to attract your customers to pull over to the side of the road and visit your market. That's great, but think about those risks. Are folks going directly from that animal feature into your market without washing their hands? Did you inform them of the need to do so? I am a lawyer. I'm not getting too legal in this presentation today. However, I can share with you that in the food safety context, a farmer, if a farmer were to find himself or herself in legal hot water in a civil liability context with food safety, you would definitely want to be able to assert that you provided your customers with the information they needed and that they ignored your clear warning and they assumed the risk. So you want some signage up at your operation saying, please wash hands after visiting with our animals prior to entering the market. Providing a hand washing station or opportunity for that to happen is also important. Areas of the farm, such as production areas that are off limits to customers, should be clearly marked. So again, informing your customers of where they should and shouldn't go. Pets should not be allowed in and around areas where food is to be consumed. This is another hot topic when we held this workshop last month. I know a lot of folks have therapy dogs, and it just seems like in 2018, a lot of folks want to take their dogs everywhere. And so we had a lot of farmers telling tales of folks trying to bring their pets into the market area and sort of ignoring those warnings. Feel free to blame food safety. I think food safety is a good reason to tell folks that that you are being vigilant and that you have a no pet policy. I think when you tell your customers the reason that pets are not allowed is because you value food safety, it's a good way to handle that scenario. And finally, bathroom risks and recommendations. We all know that bathrooms can be the source of spreading pathogens. So if indoor bathrooms are not available at your operation, portable bathroom facilities should be located in a convenient location, but far enough from the market to prevent contamination in the case of a spill. There should be a hand washing station near the portable bathroom, and signage regarding the need for hand washing should be posted. And portable bathrooms and indoor bathrooms should be stocked with soap, towels, cleaned regularly, and a cleaning log should be kept. So this should be an important part of your food safety methodology, that your workers understand the importance of keeping those bathrooms clean and keeping them well stocked. Okay, so just to kind of wrap up our on-farm market risks and recommendations, if you haven't already, seek to become GAP certified, write a food safety plan. Check out that draft food safety plan, sort of a fillable model that I provided you the link. That's really going to help you organize all of these different issues that we've talked about today. Attend a FSMA training if FSMA is applicable to you. Conduct an on-farm assessment of food safety risks and adopt the recommended methodologies found on that checklist. And train your workers. Very important to train your workers on all of these issues. Does anybody have any questions on any of that before we move on to recall? If you do, feel free to, oh, I see one question, okay.
Hi, I'm sorry, I don't know how this works. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, great. My question is, do you have any materials available in Spanish for workers?
We do in Maryland. We have that DVD that I referenced that's available from the Department of Agriculture. It's in English and in Spanish.
Okay, great.
Yeah, you're welcome. And the signage that's available through the Department of Agriculture is also in English and in Spanish. Good question. Okay, I will move on, but feel free to stop me. So, recall planning. So all Maryland farmers, large or small, have a shared goal, and that's to grow safe food for consumers. Clearly, no farmer wants to make anyone ill. However, foodborne illness outbreaks happen. And when an outbreak occurs and can be traced to its source, it may be followed by an investigation and or a recall of the product. A recall can result in substantial financial damage, not just to the grower involved, but really to the entire industry. I'm sure a lot of you probably heard about the romaine spinach outbreak, romaine lettuce rather, outbreak that happened over the holidays. And I know a lot of folks who decided not to buy romaine lettuce when that was all going on, even before all the information was really totally known about that. Just sort of rumblings of that fear can really have a negative impact on folks. Having a recall plan in place, or even just understanding the process of how this will go, is really going to lessen confusion, delay, and the financial repercussions associated with a recall. So we put together a guide to creating your own recall plan, and so I've given you the link there. And we also put together a model recall plan, and it's a fillable PDF. And really what I'm going to be doing now for the rest of the webinar is going through the information that's in the guide. And both of these are found under the Publications Library tab of the ALEI website, the umaglot.org. And I am going to be referencing specific parts of the model recall plan. So those two documents are there for you. I hope you can take advantage of them. We put these together in collaboration with the Maryland Department of Health and the Maryland Department of Agriculture, because we were getting questions at food safety trainings from operators, such as, if somebody called me and said, I think your food made me sick, what would I do? A lot of farmers were sort of in the dark, and there was some confusion and no one ever likes to think about this topic. I know this is about as popular as talking about estate planning. No one likes to talk about death. No one likes to think about the worst, making someone sick from your food. But I think it's really important to just understand what would happen, what are your obligations if you were to receive that call. So this is just a little visual of what our model recall plan looks like. Like I said, you can see it's a fillable PDF, so hopefully that'll help folks take that step and adopt one of their own. So what is a recall plan? It's a documented, systematic plan outlining how a grower will track and recall products. Plans can really vary in specificity. We tried to go pretty specific in our model. If you have a small operation, you might not need all that detail, but it's going to include the who, the what, and the how. Who in the operation will do each task during a recall, what steps should be taken, and how the recall procedures will be implemented. So to make it even a little bit easier, we broke it down into these 10 parts: preparing for the recall, identifying the concern, initiating it, notifying the regulatory agencies, identifying and tracing products, notifying affected parties, controlling and disposing of products, determining the effectiveness, terminating, and then getting back to business, remedying the recall's cause and restoring operations. So the best way to prepare for a recall is to keep good records. So I've talked today about the importance of keeping records. In this context, the kinds of records that will be helpful for you are customer buyer contact lists. I know this can be challenging for on-farm market operators. You might have a lot of people in and out of your market all the time, but to the best of your ability, keeping track of the folks that are buying your products is going to come in handy if you had to recall some of them. And it's important to have a recall team contact list. Assign each staff member, if you're a family operation, family members, a role in the recall process. So if you look in the appendix to the model recall plan, we have examples for you to use to try to make this a little bit easier. Be sure you fill in your county health department number. That's a part of the model recall plan that's blank. The recall team roles, the recall team leader, that's the person who's going to initiate the recall and really kind of be the boss and make critical decisions. The team coordinator, and this can be, we can join these two together if it's a small operation. Government liaison, this is an important person. As I'll explain here in a minute, if you have to go through a farm recall, you're going to be having close contact with regulatory agencies. And so you're going to need to have one primary person who's going to have those communications, and this person should be know where the records on your farm are located, because they're going to need to give the information that the regulators need. Media customer spokesperson. You'll get some assistance on this from the regulatory agencies, but if you have a person in your operation who's, maybe this person's good at social media or handling, talking to your customers, maintaining your website, that sort of thing, that's a good person to choose for that role. Legal counsel, that might be potentially part of this, and then an insurance agent. If you have product liability coverage, or I know there are recall products out there, if you have any of that type of insurance, your insurance agent is probably going to be part of the process as well. So does your farm have a traceability plan? Do you keep records of your inputs, soil amendments, chemicals, so that you could link them to each of your crop types and ultimately, if necessary, to the buyer? Could you produce that type of information if need be? Do you label your products with some kind of a code, like a lot number based on harvest date, crop, field number? And again, I know this is daunting for small operations, but really, if you can try to adopt a system like this, it's going to benefit you, because if you were to go through this process, it's going to limit what you would need to recall. We've provided a model for you in the in Appendix C. Mock recall exercises are important. So once you have the plan, take it out for a test drive once a year. Conduct an annual mock recall. Obviously, inform the buyer it's an exercise, and then see if you could trace the product if you needed to. If there's breakdowns in the plan, it gives you great information to improve the plan, and we've given you an example of that in Appendix D. So how does this all come about? How would you end up in a situation where you would need to initiate a recall? A couple different ways. Consumer complaint, so that phone call like we talked about with a customer saying, I think your food made me sick. Notification by a regulatory agency of an issue. State and federal regulatory agencies conduct periodic sampling, so they could give you a call and say that they have found a problem. Or it could come from an internal discovery. So let's say that you were doing that water quality testing that we talked about for GAP compliance, and you received some troubling test results. You know you just used that water source for post-harvest purposes, and that product just went out the door, and you think that that could potentially make someone sick. An important thing, even for very small operations who don't feel that they're quite at the point of having an entire recall plan done yet, is having a procedure for recording consumer complaints. So, with the situation of someone calling and saying your food made me sick, are your workers trained to understand what to do in that situation? Would they know to take the complaint seriously? What information would they get from that caller? We have created a customer complaint form that you can put by the phone, talk to your staff about it, talk to the other members of your operation about it, and explain the importance of getting all the information that you possibly can from that caller. It might be the last time you hear from them. And if it ended up, God forbid, if this situation ended up with, you being served with a lawsuit related to this person being sick, the content of that call would become very important. So you want to get as much information as possible. An important thing to point out in the consumer complaint form that's found in Appendix E to the model recall plan is if someone does call and say, I think your food made me sick, offer to come pick up the rest of the food from the person if they're nearby in your area. So if somebody bought a pint of strawberries and they ate 4 strawberries last night and they've become violently ill, ask to go pick up the rest of them if they're, a half an hour away, or see if the folks will be willing to drop the rest of them off so that you can have control over that food. Initiating the recall. Not every complaint is going to result in a recall, far from it, but every complaint should be reviewed and treated seriously. In Maryland, a food-borne disease outbreak is defined as 2 or more related cases not within the same family of an illness following consumption of a common food item. So if you receive 2 or more complaints not within the same family, you should definitely move ahead and contact your county health department and the Maryland Department of Agriculture, specifically the food quality assurance folks. If you decide to initiate a recall, the good news is that you won't be alone. As I will explain, the regulatory agencies will help you through this, but you're going to need to assemble the recall team, maybe call your lawyer, and definitely call your insurance carrier if you have some insurance coverage for a situation like this, and then we've provided a checklist for you, so hopefully that will help you keep things on track throughout. So if you think your product made someone sick, like I said, call the health department, call the Department of Agriculture, and from there, the Department of Agriculture and the Department of Health, they're going to coordinate on the recall process. If the recall is interstate, meaning more than one state, so if someone in Delaware, if we're in Maryland, someone in Delaware says that your product made them sick, then the FDA is going to become involved in the process. The FDA does have a 24-hour emergency line, so if there's anything serious or life-threatening, you can also call that. Good news is you're not alone in this, and the regulatory agencies can help you through the process. We provided a health hazard questionnaire in Appendix G to the model recall plan. We really did that not because we expect farmers to be conducting a health hazard evaluation, but to give you an idea of what criteria the regulatory folks would be looking at and considering when they decide whether or not a recall is necessary. So, if a consumer is treated by a physician for a foodborne illness, so we all eat a lot of things every day, sometimes, it's very difficult to figure out what made us sick, but if they go to a doctor and the doctor sees signs of a foodborne illness, the doctor is going to report the illness to the Maryland Department of Health, and then an investigation may lead to a recall. A recall can also be initiated by state or federal sampling, like we said. If a farmer is implicated in an outbreak, the county health department, the Department of Health, and the Department of Agriculture are going to assist the farmer in notifying consumers and removing the product. The goals of the state agencies during the outbreak are to provide support to the farmer and to protect the public health. However, in order for them to do their job, it's vital that the regulatory agencies are notified as soon as practicable of a potential food safety issue. So to learn more about the regulatory investigation process, check out this presentation also on the Ag Law Food Safety page. Here's a few slides from it. So this presentation was put together by experts at the Maryland Department of Health and the Maryland Department of Agriculture, specifically for this workshop and webinar series. I asked them if they could walk farmers through some of the insider information, what the regulators would be looking at in this scenario if they had to come onto your farm and conduct an investigation, to try to give farmers as much information as possible. So this is directly from them. The goal of their investigation is to identify the root cause of the outbreak, ensure contaminated product is removed from distribution, prevent future outbreaks, and they want to let folks know, they are there in a helpful capacity, but there can be regulatory repercussions for distributing adulterated food. So their investigation is going to focus on those 4 W's that we've already talked about today. The good news with all of this is that it's all pretty repetitive. So the GAP procedures, things you're going to find in the Food Safety Modernization Act, the risks and recommendations I walked you through today, they're all very similar. So they're going to focus on workers, water, wildlife, and waste, and a few other things. So worker health, do you have an employee illness policy? Has the farmer trained his or her workers? Do the workers have what they need to maintain good hygiene? Do they have access to bathrooms, hand washing facilities, break areas, and that sort of thing? Break areas separate and apart from production and not near where food is going to be food that's going to be sold to the public. Water. Do you monitor your irrigation and post-harvest water quality and source? Wildlife. Do you monitor your fields for domestic animal intrusion and wild animal intrusion? Do you conduct some of those sweeps like we were talking about before prior to harvest? And then the issue we were talking about of the agritourism type animals, do you have a petting area on the farm? Is it separate from where your produce is grown? And how, are you informing your customers of the need to wash their hands after they've been around those animals in that issue, or that part of the farm? Waste. Just what we talked about before, biological soil amendments, that type of thing. And then here's a few other things they'll be looking for if they come onto the farm to conduct a food safety investigation. Food contact equipment. So do you have a procedure for cleaning and sanitizing those harvest baskets, harvest knives, dump tanks? We talked about that today, the need to make sure that you have a procedure for doing that. Do you have procedures in place for if there was some kind of flooding or storm activity that could somehow contaminate produce? Basically, they're going to be evaluating the food safety culture on your farm. So, do you have a food safety culture? Have you taken steps to assess your risks, prevent your risks, train your workers, and establish some emergency procedures? These are a few other things they wanted folks to know. It would be helpful if there was a responsible individual that was on site that's knowledgeable about production, harvest, post-harvest, so that would be the government liaison team member, and that person can answer questions, provide documentation, and that there will be records available for them that will give them some information on harvest locations, dates, and sales. So again, that's like your traceability plan we were talking about. Records for any produce purchased from another farmer or distributor, so that's an important point. If you sell things in your on-farm market that you purchased from another farmer, which I know a lot of folks do you have any records relating to that? Most of these things are not directly mandated by law. However, they are going to help expedite the process, and if you were found to be the source of something like this, clearly you would want this process to move as fast as possible to prevent folks from getting sick. Okay, so once the recall is initiated, it's crucial for a grower to identify any unsafe products and track those that are still in the supply chain. So that involve your traceability plan. Good records are going to narrow down this search and, like I said, reduce the amount that's going to need to be recalled. When you're in that process where you're tracking things down, you're going to want to be able to keep track of all that. So we've created a traceability log that can be found in Appendix H. You're going to need to notify the affected parties, and this is really going to depend on the size and scope of your operation. In an on-farm market, this might come down to having some signage up at the market or putting something on your website. But during a recall, you're going to work with the regulatory agencies to notify all parties, and you're going to keep a communication log of all efforts that you made on that front. The regulatory folks can help you with crafting a press release if that's necessary. You're going to need to control and dispose of the products. So if you're getting products back that have already been sent out, keeping track of that on a product retrieval log. Keeping those things once you get them back, all contaminated food clearly should be segregated and kept separate from other things that you've got going on in your market. How you're going to dispose of products, you'll get guidance on that point from the regulatory folks, but using a product retrieval log can help you keep track of what's been retrieved. And then how do you know what this is working? How do you know whether the recall's actually been effective? It's going to be a grower's responsibility to document that you've informed all customers that you possibly could and that you've taken all the actions you could. That's why communications and tracing and retrievals needs to be documented. And then everybody's favorite part, please make it end, terminate the recall. That's really going to lie with the regulatory agency, so it's going to be their call with whether or not the recall should be terminated. A recall is considered complete after all possible customer responses indicating receipt of the notice have been received, and basically after you've done all you could. So a plan, the final part of the recall plan is how are you going to remedy the cause and restore operations. So, this is really going to vary, but if for some, let's say after the regulatory investigation, the cause of the contamination was found to be listeria in your cooler that got on some produce and made some folks sick. Clearly, you're going to need to clean and sanitize that cooler. If you weren't doing it before, start doing it. If you were doing it before, do it in a different way or potentially even get a new cooler. So that's an example of how you're going to remedy the cause, but how are you going to restore your operations? It's not just going to be physical operations, it's also going to be public trust. So thinking about that. The best way to survive a recall is really to be prepared and be proactive. So our hope with all of this, and I'm glad everyone joined us today, is that we've given you some information so that you can be prepared and be proactive in this process. Nobody likes to think about distributing an unsafe food product, but it is something that should be anticipated, something you need to think through, and having a plan in place is going to result in a more organized recall experience, and hopefully it's going to help you to eliminate mistakes that you would make under stress. So with that, I will open it up for questions. I'd like to thank everybody for participating today. Anyone with any other questions can feel free to contact me. There's my name, my email, my phone number. After today's webinar, I'm going to email you an evaluation. I ask that you please take a few moments and fill it out. Like I said, this is a grant-funded project, so we do need to record how well we did today. Please give us some honest feedback so we can improve in the future. And then I'm also going to be emailing you again in 6 months, seeing what, if any, steps or actions you took in result of today's webinar. With that email, with the evaluation, I will provide a link to today's webinar so everyone can have it and everyone can take advantage of these links I've been referencing throughout. And today's recording will be posted up on the video section of the Ag Law website, the ALEI website. I do want to acknowledge that some of the information in today's presentation was sourced from the Farmers Market Federation of New York, Cornell University Cooperative Extension, Jefferson County Food Safety Training Curriculum, Food Safety Recommendations for On-Farm Sales. It's a great source of information. So does anyone have any questions? If you do, please type them in the chat box. Seeing no other questions, I hope the information we provided here today was helpful, and I am going to stop the recording. If you have any other questions, please get in contact with me.